I'd like to introduce you to today's presenter, Brittany Cole. Brittany is a learning leader with experience in organization development, human performance, corporate learning, and has worked remotely managing virtual teams for more than a decade. She forms lasting partnerships with her clients, helping them with learning design and architecture, content development, leadership and professional development, performance consulting, technology implementation, and change management. Most recently, she's helped pioneer a new experiential learning methods in defining Learning 3.0 taxonomy. I know Brittany plans to share a little bit more about herself in a few slides, so Brittany, I will go ahead and turn this session over to you.
Great. Thanks, Kayla. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Super. Well, welcome, everybody. I know I only have 20 minutes, and I will talk really fast, and again, we'll do questions at the end. So when we think about design thinking, the first thing I think is just another buzzword, right? Because a lot of us who are in learning might be asking and really second-guessing ourselves. You know, what were we doing before? Was it so bad? Is design thinking really new or so radically different that it's going to just explode our minds? Or really, were we doing elements of it or part of it as a part of our other processes of how we analyze, design, and create learning experiences? In other words, does it really matter? So can design thinking really create positive business results? And the answer is yes, because really the focus of design thinking, which will take the next 20 minutes to unpack, is you're focusing on just one thing, and that's the learner or the user or the human who's experiencing whatever intervention you intend to design. So a little bit about me. I live in Minnesota, and it's a balmy 2 at the moment. I have 3 small kids. So if you think about just that, what can you glean from me? Really, 2 things. One, I'm no nonsense because I live in the cold, and I have no time. So it makes sense that it's about honing in on what matters, right? Who is your learner? Who is your end person receiving what you're building? And really in learning and training, what matters is that any learning experience, training program, development initiative, transformative initiative, it just moves the needle, right? And moving the needle, right, business results can be operational, right? It can be better internal results, better morale, engagement, retention. It can be more sales, lower handling time for a call center, but it's focused on the end product, right? So again, it moves the needle. So the reason why I share that is, again, let's think of this year of using design thinking. We're going to walk through a framework. We'll go through it quite quick, and hopefully by the end of the next now 16 minutes, you'll have some tools in place where you can implement this for yourselves. But you might be wondering, why food, right? Why did I bring in peas and carrots into the discussion? And the answer revolves around really 2 things. One, I'm on the Whole30 diet, so I'm starving, and everything revolves around food. At least I can eat peas and carrots, that's what I tell myself. But really, when you think about food and learning experiences, it's all about the recipe, right? Think of yourself, right? If you eat it, what makes it so good that you want to make it again? Or you go back to that restaurant and have that exact same thing versus browsing the menu. Even if you're on some ridiculous restrictive diet, you still want to eat something that's satisfying. And as learning and development professionals, we want to make learning so good to experience, so much so that it helps us achieve our goals, right? In my case, it's leading a healthier lifestyle, and learning, that can be, again, moving the needle. So thinking of that recipe analogy again as that design of that learner experience, right? When it's cooked or baked just right with that perfect blend of ingredients, you have this fantastic meal that you want to make again and again. But you want to think of it in terms of, with a design thinking mindset, our role is to create a recipe that people love, they come back for more, but it also allows for tweaking, right? You might add a little bit more salt. So in learning, you might give people the chance to contribute. So just as somebody tweaks a recipe, we also want to create experiences that can be customized for that end person, that they can make it their own. So in other words, that's why I brought in food. So, okay, I get it, Brittany, you like to eat, so now what? Again, bringing it back to the person, let's really tackle what that approach is and talk through how it applies to, again, learning, training. You know, again, lots of buzzwords in our industry, so I'll probably use the term learning experience, but that could be a training intervention. It can be a combination of things, right? It doesn't necessarily mean it's just training, but when you have a human focus, it could be performance support with a user interface design. It could be a change in an organizational process. So we're just going to wrap that up into the whole learning ecosystem. But it can, the actual output doesn't necessarily need to be training. Okay, so before we get to the model, where do you start? So when you think of a design thinking framework, and you're focused on that end user, the first thing you do before you jump into ideating, before you even go into your research, is you bring people to the table. And what you're trying to do is bring a diverse set of individuals, and not just necessarily diversity from the leadership's perspective, but as you're trying to solve a problem for someone other than yourself, the assessment of that situation is made richer by really having people from different backgrounds. So it might be different disciplines, it might be different demographics, it might be a high performer on your team, it might be a junior person, it might even be an average performer from another division, a senior leader. So it's bringing multiple individuals together. What I find where we get hung up in this piece is when we design experiences, we might be focusing only on high performers, or we're focusing on just the leadership of what they're thinking the issue is. But when you actually use a design thinking methodology, you're bringing everybody together. So you're having multiple perspectives. So let's assume you have that group. So now how do you facilitate a discussion to help you get to a point where you can solve a problem with that learner at the center? And we're going to walk through really this 5-step model. So again, empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. So we'll walk through a little bit about what that means, what you can do during sort of each session, and sort of iterate as you go. So again, the reason why you see the gears is that they sort of cycle through. But again, you're always coming back. This is an iterative, agile, little a process. So while the steps also, you might have seen other models where maybe empathize is called research, or these two are combined together. Really, the intent is the same. And it is, one, you're focusing on that end person, and most importantly, you're understanding the people and the problem, and also you take action. You're not just talking about it. You're not just thinking, okay, what can I do, and then stop there with an analysis, but you go that next step and you try it out, you test it out, you see what works, and then you come back and you make some changes. In my personal opinion, I actually think using a design thinking approach takes some of the pressure off, because it's not about getting it right the first time. It's about taking action in order to learn, which is somewhat ironic in our profession, but you're always tweaking, you're always sort of sense checking is something, is a term I've used before, and you're gaining insights you might not have, which you might otherwise wait too long to discover if you wait until things were perfect. So, okay, you have this group, you have this process, so now what? If you do a design thinking session and you do this within a group setting, one of the most important pieces when you have a diverse group is to build trust. I'm not going to go into any more detail than that, but before you just jump right in with individuals who are frontline contributors, senior leaders at various levels of performance, you have to make sure that this group can work together. So again, you want to build trust, you want to get people moving, get people talking before you dive right in, because you actually might start to have some uncomfortable conversations about truly what the problem is. You're asking people to be honest. So when you ask people to be honest and you say, okay, let's empathize, which is step one, is you're really answering these 4 questions around who are you, right, involved in this process, who are your learners, so really who's the person and the people experiencing this particular intervention or who are experiencing this problem, and what's their deal, right? So think too, even if you're building something or you're solving a problem for a large, wide audience, different learners might have different issues, right? If you think about a younger audience, they might have no problem with having an app, whereas maybe with another audience, an app might not be A, interesting, or B, accessible. So think about really where are they coming from within their work, right? What is their workflow? What is that day in the life? And if you have that group of people in the room who can actually define it for you, it's going to be that much easier. But also, the emphasized phase includes one, at bottom line, is being a good listener. So it might be a combination of things that might not occur in just one setting, but it can be just different ways to research a problem. So it might be field research, interviews, getting feedback, asking questions, observing what individuals are doing on the job that you're trying to just understand and absorb. So really it's not making assumptions, but it's pouring in and it's doing some really good upfront research so you can empathize with that learner. And really the output of that, if you think through, you go through this empathize phase, is you want to understand who your learner or even your matrix of learners are, because it might not just be one role, it might be a mix of roles. So for example, and again, I won't go into a level of depth, but you might have high experience, experience versus performance. And one of the things that can help you really get into the learner's mind is crafting statements of what they might say. And again, it's completely genericized, but on one end, right, someone who's very senior, that's very performance around a new initiative, I'm senior and I know it, right? There's that level of arrogance. Whereas you might be new and your performance isn't quite vetted yet. You're just trying to get through and really understand where you are in your organization's framework. So if you can walk away with the empathize phase and understand who your learners are, then you can get to the next phase, which is define and determine, what kind of impact you want to have. So from what I showed you before, that's a mix of audience and a mix of learners. So you might have different problems for each level of learner, but really the two questions you want to answer for yourself is for those individuals, based on your research, what are we solving for? It can be completely narrow for a program. It can be much wider for solving how people do their day-to-day work. And so you kind of have to, again, understand your sphere of influence and control. And one of the ways you can do that is really crafting and doing some sort of ripple effect exercise where you identify the learner, and then you start to think through what do they influence, where do they connect with, right? Their leader, that leader's leader, that organization. And at each layer, right, of each layer of that ripple, what problem are we trying to solve for? And so if you can identify who your learners are and you, at different layers, different ripples, what you're trying to solve for, you're going to be then in a space to help ideate solutions. What you don't want to do as part of any design thinking or even any design of any training or learning experiences, don't accept the problem statement put forth by the SME, right? We've all heard it before. I need training. I need a 20-minute e-learning. I have a 1,000-page document. Can you just put it in some sort of interactive PDF and make an assumption that that's the right answer? Design thinking says, that sounds great. Do you mind if we do some upfront research to really do some investigating to see who your learners are and what their problem is? Okay? All right, we've got 5 more minutes. We're flying through. So next stage is ideate. So again, get to this point, we've defined our problem, now what? This is when we start to, again, it's brainstorming. What could be done, right? What's unusual? What else is out there? What haven't we tried? This is that chance when, again, you have this mixed, diverse group of people who are coming from different angles. And this is where you might have multiple colored sticky notes and everyone is putting forth an idea that art of what's possible is what you're trying to define. And here, it's easy to say, well, that's not going to work because we have this LMS, or that's not going to work because we have hourly employees. But this is where you want to stop being a critic and really start trying to create solutions. So it could be, again, it could be training, it could be learning experiences, it could be changes to process, products, and how people reporting structure. It could be a multitude of things. And this is where you just, again, start to get it on the wall, think through what could potentially solve this problem. And ideally, once you get enough ideas, you can start to put pieces together. So it might not be this idea or this idea or this idea, but it might be a combination of all four. And you get to this point where you say, okay, we have this broad base of ideas, now what? Let's mock it up, right? Let's prototype it. And the word prototype, again, we hear 1,000 different terms of what prototyping can be. It doesn't necessarily have to be a functional end product. It could be something as simple as a comic strip, a storyboard. Some people define it as minimum viable. Rough cut in, if it's some sort of online e-learning digital component, something that's a rough cut in storyline. It could be a multitude of different outputs that you agree on to say, let's build this experience out. And then once you get to a point where you can have people, if they close their eyes and they envision what it could be, test it, right? Implement it. So this, again, test, implement, and call it, again, any other synonym that's similar to test. And you say, did it work? Did you like it? If it's a product, would you buy it? If not, why? Why not? And so it's starting to go through, does it actually address the problem from the learner's point of view? So again, in other words, if I took a part of this program or this experience, would it help me thrive in my work, right? Does it move the needle? And if it does, great. Maybe there's some tweaking and you get to the next layer and you build another, you go from storyboard to, you go to a full-on portal. Or if you're thinking of a mentorship program, instead of a script or a comic strip, you actually build out some pieces. And so you go to that next layer of complexity, and then you test it again, right? You test based on your feedback. And really, when you think of this whole test piece, bottom line, you're getting data, you're getting information. And then you're making informed decisions based on who your learners are, which could evolve over time, right? You're getting data, which can also potentially change your problem statement over time, or at least it allows you to go back to it to say, are we making an impact? And then you go back. Again, you're not waiting until perfect. You're getting to a point where you can make a decision, take action, try it out, and then wash, rinse, repeat, try again. I think I have about a minute left. So going back to food, like I said, I'm from Minnesota. I'm on day 16 of the whole 30. On day 30, I'm making a hot dish, because that's what we do up here with tater tots and cheese. It's a thing. So any recipes, feel free to send them out. Kayla, I'll hand it back to you so you can let me know if there's any questions.
Great. Well, thank you. I think now we've all just learned a lot and we're hungry. So, so we appreciate that. And so I don't get any more starving than I already am. I'll have you actually flip it to 2 more slides forward so that we can all see your contact info, because I know that's going to be the next step, is that everyone will want to have, we all have questions coming in. Before we jump into the Q&A though, I do want to make sure that everyone knows that your contact info is here. You're available for contact afterwards. We'll also be, Brittany's been very gracious to do a blog post after this session. So any Q&A that comes in, she'll be responding to in a blog post in addition to the call today. I know we are at that 20-minute mark. We'll stay on for about 5 more minutes to address these questions. But if we don't get to any, they'll be in the blog post that will be sent to you to the email address that you provided. This will also go out with the recording and the slides from today, so those will all be in your hands here in a few days. So without further ado, we do have questions coming in, so I'm going to jump into those. So Brittany, the first question that came in is, what if you were going through a design thinking process for multiple roles and learners? Can you dive into that a little bit more?
Yeah, that's a great question, because you might not be solving just for one function or just for one role. Again, it goes back to when we talked about creating learner personas. It's having a distinct persona as much as you can for each group of learners, for each role. And what you'll find is the intervention for each role might not be the same solution. So if you find that you're trying to genericize the solution too much, then take one role and do a design thinking approach with that particular role, and then add on to another role or add on to another layer of leadership. Ideally, it's probably always going to be true. You're going to have multiple roles, backgrounds. Even within the same role, you're going to have nuances. So it's going to be more common than not when that's going to happen. But again, go through the same process for each one, and you'll find that there might be components of the solution that are going to be common to all, but then there's going to be parts of the intervention that are going to be unique to the role, which again goes to that sort of customization of your recipe.
Well, speaking of recipes, this next question just came in, and I like this one. So what if your learners are not hungry? Is there a secret recipe?
That's a great question. You know, that goes back to a couple of things. In fact, it's ironic. I was having a conversation with some colleagues, and we were talking about different curation platforms and different learning experience platforms, and the whole concept of if you build it, will they come? And if they're not, then why not? And it's again, being intentional about what the problem you're solving for is, right? Throwing in other technology might just be one more thing, right? So if you give people more, you might be confusing the landscape, right? They're getting more information from different and disparate places. So if you take something away, they might not be hungry, but they might be already full. So how do you give them time and space to actually generate an appetite? That is lots of analogies in that last sentence. But it goes back to problem solving. You might find out why if you actually say, what's the issue here?
So I think in the next question, actually, and there's a few that have come in that are kind of addressing areas of resistance. And so the next one is, do you have any ideas for when the response to let us research or investigate, the response is no?
That's going to happen, right? Because it could be a couple of things. One, we don't have time. Two, we don't have resources available, or B, we don't have budget or money. So one is that you can help by bringing multiple people, right? So you can research on yourself, right? You're a learner. If you're going to be on the receiving end of a solution, it's really being honest about your day. So you can potentially get a group together that's as diverse as possible, as opposed to going into some full-fledged, what might seem like analysis paralysis. It's also potentially making some assumptions. So if we think back again about learner personas, if you can make assumptions of who your learners are and potentially vet those assumptions as to the level of depth that you can, at least you can get to a point where you know who you're solving for, and then you can potentially make assumptions based on who these people are and what their workflow is. What are they solving for, right? It could be even doing research on job descriptions, job postings for your organization. So it's that grittiness where if you're not able or have time to have full-fledged interviews or observation sessions where you can pour in, it's going to what do you have access to today, where you can learn about what of the group that you're trying to solve for.
So this next question is more just around design thinking in general. Do you have just a quick 30-second response to, what is the definition of design thinking?
Oh, that's a great question, and something I probably will think through and type that I might not have at the top of my head. I mean, I guess if I had to just say something, it would be I'd say methodology or approach, used by, I don't want to qualify who would use the approach, right? You don't want to say instructional designers or consultants, but you can say, used by professionals to solve a problem and take action for that client.
I think that was on the minds of a few folks on the call, so that's probably appreciated, and I know you could probably get a little bit more detailed in the blog follow-up too. We're 7 minutes over, so I'll take one more. What we'll do is go ahead and keep those questions coming in. I'll keep the session open for a minute or two once we close this out, just so that any folks on the call who want to throw in their questions for Brittany, we'll address them in the blog post. Go ahead and enter those in there. But for the last question, this is a good one actually. How long does a design thinking process typically take?
That's it, and that's an objection you might receive, right? Do you feel like you're in perpetual beta? You never get to the end point. So the length of time you can do a design thinking session, right? You can get everyone together and break it apart and in a 4-hour workshop. It can be something that lasts a lot longer if you're able to, pour into observations and have interviews. It can be, a multi-week, especially if you get into multiple and complex roles and levels of leadership. But if you, again, thinking of going, and I saw one of the questions that came in too, like what would be an example of a prototype, it depends on how scrappy, right? You can, in a way, we've done sessions where at the end of the session we've prototyped a solution, something enough that people can say, all right, I can think through what this could be. So I'll give you a quick example. We identified a need in the market that there might be a need for some sort of like a productivity app around how you coach others. So when we got to the point where we investigated and researched the market and got to a point to storyboard, the storyboarding took some time, but we actually prototyped with that. We didn't have enough. We didn't want to wait too long to get into to get to the point where we developed something, so then people say that wasn't what we wanted to do. But really, from end to end, that took about 6 weeks to go from idea from problem statement to idea to something that we call the prototype. But then now we've received feedback. We're going to go to another layer of prototyping. So it essentially just makes the solution one more layer complex, and that's going to take another probably 4 weeks. So it depends on the solution that you are trying to test. That's an extremely vague answer. But I'll give some answers in the blog post of some more ideas based on some different levels of solutions. Great question.
Well, we sure appreciate your time for doing that. Go ahead and keep those questions coming in if you do have them, or even your thoughts or comments. We'd love to hear them. But with that, because we are over, I do want to say thank you to today's speaker, and thanks to everyone who attended for your time and attention. We hope that you'll join us again for our next Learning Trends webinar. Next week, we'll be sharing ideas for implementing augmented reality into your learning strategy. And this will be with Ann Rollins. Registration is available at gpstrategies.com under our webinar section. So I wish everyone on the call a wonderful and productive rest of your week, and I know I'll be going to have lunch right now. Thanks, Brittany.
Thanks, Kayla. Me too. Bye.